Today's lecturer is William Hudson. A highly sought-after specialist in historical performance practice, William Hudson has workshopped Baroque singing styles and ornamentation throughout the United States, most recently at the National Association of Teachers of Singing Convention. In 2017, Dr. Hudson was awarded a prestigious NEH grant to direct the seminar Courtly Lyric in the Medieval French Tradition, Poetry as Performance. Dr. Hudson is the director of Liber Ensemble for Early Music and teaches voice at Illinois Wesleyan University.
Hello and welcome to Damned da Capo, Stylistic Considerations for Performing and Ornamenting Baroque Song. My name is Bill Hudson, and I am an Associate Professor of Music at Illinois Wesleyan University and Governor of the Illinois District of Nats. The purpose of this talk is to inform you on matters of Baroque performance practice as it applies to song. This subject is near and dear to my heart because I've been performing this repertoire for over 25 years. I hold a Master of Music degree in Early Music Vocal Performance from Langy School of Music and a Doctor of Music in Early Music Vocal Performance with cognates in Vocal Pedagogy and Music History from the Jacobs School of Music at Indiana University. Baroque song has always been part of the repertoire used to train young singers. Think of the 24 Italian songs and arias. There are countless books and articles that dive deep into every aspect of Baroque performance practice, but for the non-specialist, these resources can be daunting. It is important to note that this talk's target audience is the non-early music specialist, and it aims to distill some of the bigger topics associated with performance practice, so we can more effectively teach this style. Rules of Baroque performance practice seem more mystical than anything in the 19th century because the information we have to work with in these scores is scant. Often composer and performer were the same person, so the scores were merely sketches of the whole. That, and there was a fair amount of improvisation expected from the performer. We must consider the Baroque score to be closer to a jazz chart than a published song from the 19th century. A seasoned jazz musician can interpret the chart because they know the style. Armed with the knowledge from this talk, I am confident that your teaching of Baroque repertoire will improve, as will your students' enjoyment singing it. To frame our discussion, when we talk about the Baroque period, we are speaking of a 150-year time span, effectively 1600 to 1750. Encompassing all of Western European musical culture. Given that there were enormous changes all over Europe which occurred at the end of the Renaissance and prompted historians to label this new era, it's impossible to codify Baroque style with one set of rules. There are, however, a few common elements that can be discussed, which will greatly enhance your performance and teaching of Baroque song. As I said, this topic is huge. I have included a handout which accompanies this talk with additional information and resources and an extensive bibliography. The four topics we're going to consider today are pitch and temperament, tempo and affect, phrasing, and ornamentation. I will briefly speak of the first three topics and spend the bulk of the time discussing how to teach ornamentation. Pitch and temperament. A440 didn't become the standard concert pitch until 1939. Before that, pitch varied by up to a third in either direction. This doesn't concern most of our studios, where our singers perform Handel and Purcell with piano. That said, if a student ever gets hired to sing a Messiah with orchestra, they'd be wise to ask what the performance pitch would be. Most early music ensembles will use a generic performing pitch or a generic Baroque pitch with a semitone lower at A415. Temperament is far too big a topic to get into in this short presentation. Understand that equal temperament was not the norm for the Baroque. And if you perform with period instruments, expect them to have decided on a temperament other than equal. That said, as singers, we're lucky that we can adapt without having to alter a fingering or change a fret. It's been my experience that a singer with a good ear will have no problem adapting to an altered scale. Tempo and affect. Precise tempo markings are rare in the Baroque score, so if you see a metronome marking, you can bet it was probably added by the editor. When the piece lacks a specific tempo marking, one must determine the tempo by context. Consider the meaning of the text, the meter, the bass line and harmonic rhythm, and the key. Prominent dissonances, chromaticism, or many harmonic changes require a slower tempo. Imitative or dance-like sections are quicker. And remember that tempo markings do not have consistent meanings from composer to composer like they do in later music. A few quick points about the adagio and the allegro. As I said, these terms, the meaning of these terms varies by composer. The allegro implies a cheerful mood, not necessarily a fast tempo. An adagio following an allegro, like at the end of a Handel aria, means ritardando. It also allows space for a cadenza. But note, the fermata at the end of an A section of a da capo aria indicates the end of the piece. It should not be observed when singing the first A section into the B section. We're now going to move on to listen to 3 different airs from Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. And all 3 of these are in a meter of 3, but they all have vastly different tempos. This analysis is taken from Mary Sears' excellent book, Performing Baroque Music. The first air we get to is Come Away Sailors. It's in 3/4 time, and it's in F major, which implies a furious and quick-tempered subject. Also, the harmony moves basically 1 chord per bar.
Come away, fellow sailors, come away. Your way gives me away. Time and tide will right with no delay. Take a walk.
The next piece, Ah Belinda, is also in 3/4, but has a more complex harmonic rhythm and more complex rhythmic motion in the melody. In C minor, it suggests a slower tempo. Plus, Purcell did write the word slow at the beginning. Last, we get to When I Am Laid in Earth. This piece is in 3/2 time, which suggests even a slower pace. It has a descending tetrachord, or it's a lament figure, in the bass line, and chromatic inflections in the bass line contribute to this melancholic or pathetic effect. It's in G minor, which implies a melancholy or mournful tone, and it's also marked larghetto. The key of a piece also contributes to the affect and can ultimately help with tempo decisions. This table is extracted from a much larger table in Mary Sears Performing Baroque Music. It represents the 3 keys we heard. Now on to phrasing. Some hints on phrasing. One thing that will help with phrasing is to think in larger beat structures when it's appropriate. Take Come Away Sailors from our earlier example. It's in 3/4, but it's logical to feel the pulse in 1. This will allow the performer to lighten beats 2 and 3 and not allow heavy articulation to bog them down. I would argue that one could even feel Ah Belinda in a very slow 1 to avoid over-accenting beats 2 and 3. Take time at cadences, even internal ones, if the text demands it. And listen to the bass line. It can help inform you if you have any questions. In the next slide, we're going to listen to Purcell's If Music Be the Food of Love, as sung by Andreas Scholl. Notice the freedom he takes with the tempo when the bass line allows for it. Also notice the time he takes at the ends of phrases.
If music be the food of love, sing on, sing on, sing on, sing on till I am fit with joy. For then my listening soul you move, for then my listening soul you move with pleasures that can never climb. Your eyes, your mien, your tongue declare that you are music everywhere. Your eyes, your mien, your tongue declare that you are music everywhere.
Now, on to melismas. Long melismas are a hallmark for many Baroque arias and are often daunting for our students. How do we shape the phrase when we're singing one syllable? What if I can't make it through the whole phrase? Where can I sneak a breath? Practice by singing just the first note of each measure, along with the bass line. This will start to give the melisma structure. Find the patterns and form groupings. Sing them with an unmeasured break in between. Now you're teaching your student microphrasing within the long melisma. It offers structure. Remember, Baroque music is fond of upbeats. These groupings will probably not coincide with a bar line. Practice the melisma from the end. Sing the final section a few times, then add the previous, and then the next previous, etc. This will give the singer more confidence as they proceed through the long melisma because they will have practiced the ending more than the beginning. And if you need to take a breath, you've already established these little micro phrases. So choose one and actually breathe. The audience will hear it as a conscious phrasing choice, not a fault that you didn't have enough air. As I like to say, make art out of necessity. Just a quick note on sneaking breaths in the middle of a melisma. Breathing between larger intervals is easy, as is leaving off a tied note so long as it's not important to a suspension. It is not okay to just leave out notes in a melisma to catch a breath. So, what we just discussed, this is how I approach this well-known aria from Handel's Messiah. At the top, you can see 2 systems of the original, big, long slurs over the phrases. What I have the students do, after singing just the first 16th along with the bass line, the first 16th of each 4 pair, then I start breaking it up and I show the students where these little micro phrases can be. This is this is one choice of some micro phrases. There are no right answers. There are lots of different options of grouping these, but to find these mini phrases, this is how I approach it. And we start at the end, sing that last measure and a half, measure and a third a couple times, and then add the one right before it, and then so on and so forth. Another thing that can help with style is the approach to the accompaniment. Here's the very familiar opening to Purcell's Music for a While. The top score, is a Novello edition, and it's the better critical edition, but it doesn't help the non-specialist in the phrasing of the bass line. If you were to play it as written, it's very square. The international edition at the bottom has added editorial slurs to help the non-specialist phrase the bass line in a more Baroque style. Listen to this example played poorly by myself on a digital keyboard. Very little direction. With just a little bit of shape, that can transform the piece and really help the singer. On to ornamenting. Adding ornaments is obligatory in Baroque song. But how do we make this sound like this? Or even this. So, learning to ornament. As I mentioned earlier, there are a few rules that more or less apply to all Baroque music and will aid in making your song or aria sound more stylistic. There are two basic types of ornaments. There are essential ornaments, which we call graces or accenti. These are small melodic figures, usually 2-3 notes max. These include our trills, our appoggiaturas, turns, and the pourdevoix, among others. The other type of ornament is diminution or free ornamentation. These are longer figural patterns. These come from diminution manuals of the 16th and early 17th centuries, and they can be used to create da capo ornaments and cadenzas. The key is knowing where and when to ornament. So here's a helpful little chart. We can ornament with graces at cadenzas to enhance a word or some text. And we can add graces to the first A section and B sections of a da capo. Don't worry, we have theorists like Tosi who say it is perfectly acceptable to add small ornaments to these sections. Free ornaments can be added, should be added, must be added to the repeated A section of a da capo. Free ornaments are what we use to build cadenzas, and we can also freely ornament a slowly moving melody. Some things to keep in mind as you create your ornaments. You should not destroy the pulse of the music. The ornament should not be mechanically applied. The ornament should reflect the sense of the words. It should reflect the nature of the aria and should embellish but not obliterate the original line. So let's dive a little deeper into the types of ornaments. I start with the appoggiatura. The appoggiatura comes from appoggiare, which is to lean, where we get appoggio from, and it's the same sense. And when you perform an appoggiatura, it feels like you're leaning into something. It should be sung on the beat. It creates a dissonance with the bass, and it should be stronger than the resolution. Training your student to learn an appoggiatura first will help train their ears to get used to singing on a dissonance. This will, in turn, help them sing a trill properly, which must start from the upper note. Places for an appoggiatura are on dissonant intervals, which are typically the 2nd, 4th, and 7th. If an appoggiatura is notated in the score, it's usually a small 8th note or a 16th note. Their actual printed value doesn't matter. They're always worth half the value of the note to which it is attached, and 2/3 the value of the note if the note is dotted. Be mindful, though, if the small note has a slash through it, it's a grace note and should come before the beat. These are examples of appoggiaturas. The upper line shows how they would be notated in the score. The lower line shows how they would actually be performed. Now, appoggiaturas and recitative. Where do we add obligatory and voluntary appoggiaturas in recitative? The obligatory ones must come from a pair of repeated notes in a cadence. An obligatory appoggiatura on the first syllable, which is always an accented penultimate syllable, has to happen. Or add an appoggiatura when you have a repeated top note on a 4th descent. Rather, when you have a 4th descent in the cadence, you repeat the top note. So looking at this, the Handel Alcina, El mio tesoro, you have a descent of a 4th, so you repeat the top note. And in the St. John example, you have repeated notes at a cadence, so you have an obligatory appoggiatura on the first, on the penultimate syllable. And now we come to the trill, the most important ornament. Some variant of a trill is the main ornament which a student must master. Tosi says, "One who cannot trill well cannot be a good singer, no matter how much he knows." So I like to think when I'm teaching trills to students, I like to think of the trill in 3 parts. The first part is the appoggiatura on the upper note. Remember, it should be on the beat and louder than the resolution. It sets up the dissonance. The second part is the oscillation. It must be 2 distinct notes, either whole step or a half step. It must be sung in tune, and it cannot just be a wide vibrato. In the third part, the ending. Many trills end by simply elongating the last note of the trill before the resolution. You can also add a turn at the end. There are lots of variables, lots of ways you can end a trill. We've learned how to add the appoggiatura, so now let's move on to learning how to oscillate. The exercise shown here should be practiced at all pitch ranges, on all vowels, and at all dynamic levels. It should also be practiced as a whole step and a half step. I like to start it at about a quarter note equals 60 beats per minute and speed it up slowly over time. Remember, vocal trills don't necessarily need to be super fast. A singer will never be able to match an instrumentalist in that regard. Also, depending on the affect of the cadence, trills can be slow, they can speed up, they can be short, they can be long, they can be any number of things. Use your ear, use good taste, and don't forget to keep them in tune. Here's a good example of a trill. Note that the tenor starts with the appositura on beat 2, shown with the green circle.
Tutto il pianto che è solo.
Notice he did not interrupt the rhythmic flow of the piece. Now here's an example of a trill where there's more rhythmic freedom. Notice how she incorporates a subtle accent to show the start of the trill, a sort of implied appoggiatura. A quick note about trills, they should never be applied to weak syllables or final syllables in a cadence. Occasionally the word underlay must be corrected. For example, in this excerpt from Messiah, notice the correct and incorrect underlay and where you need to put the trill. Now on to free ornamentation, which is arguably the more nerve-wracking. It's certainly the harder to teach because it involves far more variables. In 1590, Virgiliano, in one of his treatises, established a bunch of rules on how to create divisions. A couple of the important ones to remember for us is that stepwise motion is safest, so long as you remain in the key. The original note must be sounded at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the measure. We'll come back to this, but this allows you to keep some sort of semblance of the original, and so you don't end up just recomposing an entirely new piece. Leaps should be good, meaning they should be consonant. It makes a nice effect to run to the octave either above or below. However, you can only leap up to an octave, or leap up an octave. You can never leap down an octave. A few other guidelines that are worth mentioning from experience. An ornament must work with the harmony. Be sure to always check it against the bass line. The ornament should demonstrate virtuosity and intensify the expression. When an ornament leaps into a dissonance, it must resolve by stepwise contrary motion. When the original leaps a third or more, you can jump up or down to any note in that harmony. And of course, as always, avoid parallel fifths and octaves with the bass. So, practicing free ornamentation. You can learn patterns by singing examples from diminution manuals. Maffei, Rognoni, Bovicelli, etc. There are lots of them, and I have them listed in the bibliography. These manuals introduce a short melodic phrase, usually 2 to 5 pitches, and a series of variations for that particular melody. These examples will establish a melodic language for the students that they can then use when creating their own improvisation. I strongly recommend that you start by writing your ornaments out. Don't rely on your memory, not yet. And once the student gets better at this, have them write out more than one set of ornaments for their piece. Once they can easily move from one to the other, they'll start mixing and matching them without even realizing it. And then they're really on their way to be able to improvise ornamentations on the fly. So here's an excerpt from Maffei's discourse on how to learn to ornament. You'll see the first measure is an ascending scale. It has no clef, it has no key signature. That's on purpose. It can be done in any key. You can put that half step anywhere. You sing that first opening phrase, and then you have you have 5 different variants of how to sing an ascending scale. And then at the beginning of the third system, you have a descending scale. That's your main melody that he's giving you. And then he gives you another 5 options on different ways you can sing that melody. Here's an example a little later, 1620, Rognoni, and he actually gives you a cadence. So just a do, ti, do cadence, and he gives you 6, I believe there are more on the next page, but he gives you 6 variations on how to sing, how to ornament this cadence. It should be noted that ornaments for 18th century da capos are more adventurous than these diminution manuals, but these diminution manuals are a really good place to start. Now, we're going to move to affanni. Learning by example is always the best, and we're lucky to have surviving examples of ornamentation from Baroque composers and performers. Most of you are aware that Monteverdi included both the unornamented and the ornamented version of the melody for Orfeo's main aria, Possente Spirito. Well, we're also lucky enough to have a number of Handel arias for which examples of ornamentation survive. Here's a brief example of an aria from Handel's Ottone with embellishments by a castrato who sang for Handel. The top staff shows the melody as written, and the bottom staff shows the ornaments as they were performed by Gaetano. Unfortunately, the singer on the recording does not sing the ornaments given by Gaetano, but the example is illuminating nonetheless. Take particular note about how both the performer and the written ornaments keep grounded to the original melody by starting and ending most measures on the original note and including any altered notes in their own embellishments. These are directly from Virgiliano's rules. So you can see with these examples that the ornamentation is quite robust, and there's a lot of it. So to wrap up this discussion, remember just a few things. Text is always the most important and should inform nearly any decision about the performance of Baroque song. We don't have to worry so much as modern performers about pitch and temperament when we're performing these songs with piano. So don't get bogged down in that literature yet. Tempo has as much to do with mood as it does with speed. If you get a little confused with some of this, we're lucky now to have more and more historically informed performances of the repertoire we're singing, and you can find some good examples that have been recorded to give you some hints if you need them. When we talk about phrasing, what's written is not necessarily the composer's intent. Remember, scores in this period are closer to a jazz chart, and they don't contain complete performance instruction. So work to break free from them. And don't be afraid to ornament. It's expected in this style. Use the diminution manuals, listen to good recordings, and borrow ideas. Ornamenting is a skill that must be learned and practiced. And I like to say, go big or go home. Charles Burney remarked that the level of virtuosity which excited such astonishment in 1734 would be hardly thought sufficiently brilliant in 1788 for a third-rate singer at the opera. The dose of difficulties to produce the same effects as 50 years ago must be more than doubled. He is, of course, talking about Farinelli and Farinelli's excessive ornamentation, which I guarantee you, no matter how hard you try, you won't be able to top. And I leave you with this very quick example at the very end of his first vocal entry during the da capo of this aria. Thank you very much.